just move that away a bit.
Actually, I would say we are seeing a trend towards subscription. I think it's the stage of the internet is like a little bit younger than we see on the TV. And TV, back in the days, everything was for free. And now the interest of the users or the viewers are more specialized. And it's not about spending or wasting time searching for something. I think we will see more subscription models in the internet.
But when you think about models like Netflix, the point of comparison for people is pay TV. So I'm paying for one or the other, I'll just pay Netflix. If you think about Spotify, the comparison is iTunes. So I'm still going to pay, I just pay in a different way. Can you imagine people paying where the point of comparison is not another paying service, but is free? So for news or for other stuff which we can get for free at the moment, do you think there's any examples of where advertising is not the way that people are funding their businesses? In social media, can you imagine people paying for anything?
Yeah, I can imagine it. I think eventually you get to the point where discovery and consumption of quality content becomes the differentiator, and that you may want to have a social network that that is validated to some level, right? That you know exactly everyone who's in that network, and that my information is only going to be used in a particular way. And so I think people and families would be willing to say, I'm going to pay for this network with this level of standards. I think, what was that? Yeah. Well, even then, starting to expose things out, right? But that's a good example of a subscription-based network where you can control, the data settings to a certain extent.
Any other examples? I mean, someone was kind of mentioning LinkedIn. Any other examples that people have got in the room of good alternatives to advertising as a way of funding businesses? I mean, LinkedIn. Would you like to say anything more about LinkedIn? No?
The company I work for, Softonic, the content we give is for free, or it's later on a pay model if you want to use the software. But it's not our software, but the information is for free. But we are thinking about a subscription model, in order to give the user safety and doing a pre-selection for the user. And I think, especially when you come to the download section of the internet, the software related, it's a lot of the question about security. And if you have an enabling force in the between, which could be us, then I guess the users are willing to pay for that.
Do any of you, I mean, if we had to take a vote and you said 5 years from now, do you think advertising will be more or less a driver of revenue on the web? What would you all say? More or less?
I think it's going to be less. I do think subscription models, so I do think we're shifting dollars around. That's how I always think, like they're shifting from an ad model offline to online, and then eventually I think you can only get a certain amount of those dollars across, and then they're going to shift into something else. But I think like the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, you think about content that you get some free taste, you pay, but I think people will, or like Netflix, you're paying for premium content. I think people are more focused on how do you create that premium. So my sense is it'll be much more mixed than it is today.
Yeah, I actually think more advertising. I think it'll be more advertising based, and I think the reason that it'll be more based on advertising is because of mobile. And I think mobile is a completely unexploited platform for advertising, and better suited than a subscription model.
Yeah, I think it's going to be more. I think it's just going to be different. I mean, I think to this point, we're going to have to find more native ways to embed into mobile. There's less real estate, so there's going to be less advertisers. So how do we engage with users? I think the necessity to engage in users, whether it's data or advertising, is still going to be there. It's a great way to do it. And as the sort of the web rolls mobile, advertising is going to be a key player there.
I think the total ad spending online, whatever device we are talking about will be much more, but the percentage of advertising towards this subscription will stay more or less the same.
Can we come back to this issue about mobile? I haven't got it here, but there's a wonderful chart that Mary Meeker's been using in the last year, which shows the amount of time that people spend on different media and the amount of revenue that goes into that media. And broadly speaking, the amount of time that people spend on TV is in line with the amount of advertising that goes on TV. The two big outliers are really press, where the amount of time that people spend reading is going down a lot, but the advertising revenue is held up. And mobile, where the opposite is the case, where the amount of time that people are on mobile devices or looking at mobile content is shooting up, and the amount of revenue on mobile is still relatively small. Can any of you talk about your experiences? I mean, you were talking earlier on, Rob, about different types of advertising and what was most effective in driving engagement. Do you have a point of view as to the role of mobile, whether or not it's underexploited, what more we need to do about it?
Yeah, so working with these very big brands, like 400 of the largest brands online, a couple things. One is, on average, it looks about 6% of their commerce is coming through mobile. The interesting thing is that there's a confusion with it, especially on the e-commerce side. So they may have apps, like we have Home Depot, so they have their own native app on iPhones. It's treated a little differently than their website, but there's, because of iPads and look at where devices are going, I think they're starting to think more of how does this all play on. There's no on-site, and then there's mobile. It's just kind of like today, that's something from the past. So I think in the next couple of years, it's just the way things are designed, the way the experience will have to be the same, but still there's like mobile stuff and a mobile team, and there's an on-site team. Sometimes they work together. Sometimes the things are totally different. So and the things I'm seeing also is like companies that do have retail stores are doing a lot more interesting things with mobile in the stores, or to drive people into the stores. So these are kind of the things that I think are unique in the world today. But obviously everyone's talking about mobile and what it can be, but it just seems like it's going to blur a lot more than it will today. I don't think we're going to be talking about mobile in the future, just commerce. So.
Alex, what are you seeing in terms of people coming to...
I just talk. We have about 23% of all our traffic coming already from mobile devices. And the revenue last year was 0. And this year it's a little bit more than 10% already. So we see the shift coming. But I also think we should stop thinking about in silos. It's about a digital device which connects you to the online world. And right now, I think in mobile, we're at the point where the technology keeps on growing to the point where it makes sense to reach the user via a mobile device. We talk local location-based services, etc., etc. So I think mobile is one device how to reach the user, and at the moment the advertising spending, for us at least, is peaking up.
What's the barrier to growing the revenue from mobile? So you're saying 23% of your viewers, your impressions, whatever, will come through some kind of mobile device, but only 10% of the revenue. What would enable you to bridge that gap and to bring those two things into line?
I think it's better advertising technology towards with more demand from the advertisers. We see a lot of advertising networks, they promise you everything. Once you shoot them in, there's not enough ad spending.
We've seen this week Google has changed the way that it charges for advertising and putting mobile and non-mobile, if I put it that way, on a par with each other. So that will also drive some of that revenue.
For sure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say that I think the two impediments right now are the ad unit, what the correct ad unit is for mobile, and the metrics or the ability to do segmentation and targeting on mobile. And so it's really it's a technology and a creative issue.
I was just going to say, from our perspective, where we're very conversion driven, the biggest challenge for us in mobile right now is that mobile publishers haven't optimized their site for mobile traffic yet. And so the conversions from the same user base, et cetera, are dramatically lower in mobile because the advertiser or the publisher hasn't optimized their site. And until they do that, sort of a chicken and egg, they're not going to get the conversions. They're not going to then do the appropriate spend, not have the ad elements aren't going to be developed in order to get there.
There's like Verizon now has a division that's taking the data they collect, and they're starting to work on how do they make that available and usable. So the carriers, when you think about it, aren't really playing in it yet. We just think about advertisers in Google, but the carriers have the footprint and they have a tremendous amount of data. So I've heard some crazy models of what they want to do with the data. Unlike people are in the stadium and they can get ads targeted based on where they are in the stadium, where they were before they came to the stadium. So there's some things I've been hearing about. So I think we don't know how the carriers are playing, but they're starting to set up divisions to take the data and do stuff with it, and that's going to be interesting.
And it could just be that we're at the same point that people were when they moved from radio to television, that a lot of the content can't just be transferred across. It needs to be created for a new medium, and there still isn't enough content and creative which is being created for that new medium. You going to add anything, Alex?
Completely agree with you. I mean, it's a different size of screen, it's a different way of using, and we cannot just transfer it one-to-one.
I was always struck when we have kind of regular WPP trips to the likes of Facebook and others, and I was struck 3 years ago when Mark Zuckerberg was talking about all of the content had to be created for mobile first, as opposed to on a different medium and then transposed over to mobile. And that kind of thing obviously needs to change. Should we open it up to the audience in terms of kind of any questions or comments that people have got? Yeah, there's a question just here.
Thank you.
Hi there. I'm Andrew Fawcett-Wolf. I'm the UK MD for Orange Advertising and Data. So a couple of points. Bruce, you're going to love me because we're your second biggest customer in the UK. We love OCR. My point being is, as a comment more than anything else, I think generally in the industry there's a glut of inventory, right, through digital media. We know that. And there's a commoditization as the agencies have built trading desks and moved into the sort of the media space. So I'm surprised that it's really about protecting that value, and for me, OCR, we're promoting it as a currency. So going back to your point about metrics, it's being able to guarantee, an audience. So you want an advertiser. So I was recently talking to the advertising director for Virgin Broadband in the UK, who are only in 3 cities. And they want to target those cities. They want to do it regionally. They want to target their latent customers. OCR can give us that ability as a third-party product. And then there's something called XCR, which I'll let Bruce talk about later, which lays TV data on top of that. So I just sort of think I'm surprised that, currency and viewable impressions, I'm surprised that's not come up. And then the second point about the stadium, we work with Manchester City Football Club. Absolutely, we can do that. We can target an audience of 80,000 people in a stadium. We know who they are. We can target them in the morning of the game. We know they're going to be there. So we can offer them cheaper train tickets. We can offer them beer vouchers. We'll have to drink beer in stadiums in the UK. That sort of thing. But the reality is the advertisers aren't interested in 80,000 people. It's not enough. So there's always that thing about the reach versus the sort of the targetability. So I don't really have a question, but that's...
No question, and a very good ad for Nielsen as well. Any other comments? Anything? Yeah, there's a question over there, or a comment.
It is a question, actually, rather than a comment. I'm one of the founders of a small startup in the UK. We are in the financial sector. we're not really looking at being a site for advertisers to advertise on. We're more likely to be advertising elsewhere. And I just really was interested in what the panel had to say about the cost of advertising online and how you see it impacting on startups. So from our perspective, I guess, we've built a platform, it works, we now have to go out and get users onto it, and that means we have to raise huge sums of money in order to pay, with the greatest of respect, the likes of you guys, to actually acquire these users. And it seems to me that the state of the industry at the moment potentially could stifle innovation and could stifle startups. And I just wonder what you guys had to say about that.
One of the more interesting developments as far as pricing of advertising inventory for digital is the coming efficiency of the marketplace, because what you've really got is you've got the gentleman from Orange who's talking about Nielsen's super premium product, OCR, which takes the most premium inventory and finds the highest value for it by finding a high target audience. But then you have AOL purchasing Adapt TV and essentially vertically integrating RTB and programmatic. And programmatic is really the buzzword right now in ad networks. And what's great about programmatic is it has the ability to digest a tremendous amount of remnant inventory that is otherwise not going to go to anyone for any particular purpose at a good value, and find the right buyer for the inventory at the right price. So the market, I think, is becoming more efficient for startups.
I would say that from a kind of the link between research and media planning and buying, there's an awful lot of possibility. I mean, that gap between where people actually are and what's being spent on those sites, there's still huge amounts of value to be had in terms of going to places where there's lots of your target audience there and the sites just aren't charging the money for it. So I think there's a lot of potential, but maybe, Rob, I mean, you would make the point that it's not just about getting people onto a site, that it's then a matter for a startup of then really converting them and getting them to feel engaged in the experience.
Yeah, and I also think for a startup, there's a company called WalkMe here in Israel, and they showed me their strategy for advertising, and it wasn't buying any Google ads, and they're doing really well. They created about 50 different content sites, but very good content, like they have like around marketers and things like that, and they actually have people who are writing for them, and then they're using that as a lead list. If they're in the audience, I'm giving their secret away, but I was really amazed, and they're buying no advertising. So I think for a startup, when I started my company in 95, and actually 99 is when we launched the software and raised money, we took ads out in the Wall Street Journal and the back covers of Fast Company. It was millions of dollars, and today, as a startup, you can set up an AWS and you can buy an ad and get one person to look at your software. It took us like real advertising to do it. So I actually think it's much more of a startup-friendly environment, and then you can create content or an app or a YouTube video that's cool. And there's so many opportunities versus we had to buy the back cover of Fast Company. That was the only thing we could do. So,
on that note, thank you all very much for spending the time being inside rather than outside, and thanks very much to our 4 panelists.